I don't know what Magnus is up to
Agreed.
there.
Well, here we go again, everybody. It is again the Speed Chess Championship. It is again presented by Coinbase. We've already got about 5,000 plus of you on YouTube, 3,000 on Twitch. We know that's going to build throughout the day because guess what? We have liftoff. It's Magnus versus Wesley.
Yep.
And we have, what do we have here? Are we going to get a Berlin? Bets on the Berlin.
A Berlin from Berlin. No, he's going to play A6.
Okay. Well, I'm excited. This is going to be great. Here we have D3. Talk a little bit about why this is kind of the popular, flexible way to avoid the most forcing lines these days, Danya.
It's been called a sideline, but I don't think it should be referred to as a sideline anymore. I mean, D3 is essentially as popular as the main line, short castle. And short castle allows the open Ruy Lopez where black takes on E4. It also allows a bunch of very topical lines within the main line. D3, a little bit less theoretical, a little bit more flexible. And Carlsen takes the ambitious approach, getting his bishop out to G5. This often leads Danny to very sharp positions, especially if black plays H6 and then G5 to eliminate that pin.
Agreed, and I want to just make an observation early that you note the pace and the deliberate nature with which these guys are using their time, Danya. I think you know what that means. I think these guys are already thinking about preparation that they brought here, and they're taking this very seriously. They are not blitzing through this with some shenanigans, sideline B3 style. I think these guys are already thinking about preparation that they with some shenanigans, sideline B3 style openings, right? They are really trying to get theory here to maybe try to take the other person by surprise.
I'm going to hazard a guess that we're going to see more variability in the opening from Carlsen than we will from Wesley. I think Wesley will probably rely on 1E4 and then Italians. But Magnus, I think, from both sides, is going to vary his openings and try to find the kinds of positions that make Wesley uncomfortable. We know how good Magnus is at that, how universal he is, more so than all of the other top players. And they're already incredibly universal. As we see an interesting transformation here, Danny. Carlsen pushes D4. Now he tries to ruin black's queenside pawn structure, but in return, you do give up the bishop pair, potentially, if black takes with the pawn. Okay, he took with the bishop.
Interesting. Takes with the bishop, which means we get more trades. The structure slightly favors valuation bar on the left. Everybody changed from a percentage to a pure evaluation. White is a teeny bit favored because of the structure. But Don, give us some highlights. What are the plans here for both sides?
Well, I like black's structure. As ugly as that pawn structure looks, I would compare it to a bumper on a car. It's functional. You've got the open B file, so you could stick a rook on B8 at some point and tickle that B2 pawn. But black is likely going to play against that E4 pawn. That pawn is a strength. Yes, it controls space in the center, but it's also a target. And black could put a rook on E8, maybe a queen on E7, and at the right moment, black can push the button and play G7, G5, unpinning the knight. And so Magnus has to make sure that he keeps that E4 pawn protected. We're likely going to see him castle kingside. He might also castle queenside, kind of like he did against Vincent Keimer in that World Cup game. I think that's exactly what he's about to decide right now, Danny.
That's a huge decision, right? Castle queenside, and we are all in for a crazy game where white advances and black attacks, or castle kingside, keep it safe. Danya, why is it not the best for white to take here and double these pawns for the viewers? I'm asking for a friend. I obviously know the answer, but please help me.
Well, I think he actually might take on F6 if he feels uncomfortable. Black might recapture.
Searching for a longer day. People feeling like the light has just come. We must never stop the way. Birds chirping and I hear my name, grasping into life. Life is happy but it's so insane. We must merely make a start. Savannah, I'm coming home. Savannah, we'll never be alone. Savannah, the beauty of the world. Savannah, let's all take a walk. Savannah. just begun. We will always tell
with the queen there. And again, it's so important to indicate that the pawn structure, Danny, is the most visually arresting element of the position, but it's also not necessarily the most important. After the trade occurs, black will be threatening to push f6, f5, harassing the e4 pawn, and white will no longer be able to castle queenside because the f2 pawn is going to hang. I think Magnus took not because he likes this endgame, but because he felt uncomfortable keeping the queens on the board. We have a completely equal endgame. I would put a rook on b8 and start with that, just accentuating the pressure on the queenside. But there's f5.
But no, Wesley likes your idea. By the way, we should point out quickly just that if e tick f5, rook to e2 was going to be the problem. So Magnus kind of saw this coming, quickly puts the rook on e1. Let's also observe time here, Danya. Very equal for both players right now on the clock.
Yeah, I don't think the clock is going to be a deciding factor until the next segment. Both of these players are, particularly Magnus, are excellent at time management. Of course, if you're Wesley, you want to make sure that you don't overthink it. F takes e4. Okay, Magnus will probably recapture, I would guess, with the knight and threaten the fork on f6, and Wesley will centralize his bishop by putting it on d4.
Okay. Knight takes e4. We'll get bishop to d4. We're going to see this right away.
Okay, b3.
Protect your pawn. And b3 is better than c3. You're not looking to force it. Yeah, okay.
You know, white actually might be seizing a slight advantage here. The b-file pressure has been exterminated. That pawn on b3 is super well protected. And the knight on e4 can be used kind of as a chisel. You could drop back to g3. There we go. The f5 square is a weakness. It's a long-term weakness. Black could bring his king up to g6, and it's not like you're suffering right away. But in the long run, white's 3-on-2 pawn majority could be used to generate more kingside pressure. I would go king f1 and maybe even trade the other pair of rooks with rook e1.
Yeah, it's interesting because normally with pawns on both sides of the board, you think the bishop is a slightly better piece than the knight. But in cases like this, the bishop lacks any targets on the queen side. They're all in light squares. And the pawn weaknesses kind of afford the knight some flexibility to kind of poke and prod, right, Danya? So, in fact, he's doing exactly that plan. He's kind of saying, look, maybe my winning chances aren't great, but I actually like my knight versus your bishop in this endgame. And you and I often say that the knight is the peskier piece to deal with low time, right? Even if objectively the bishop is doing fine. So what kind of chances are you giving Magnus to squeeze this one out potentially?
Major chances, especially if the rooks come off the board. Black will no longer have any chances to create a passed pawn on the queen side. That's the big problem. It's not that the queen side pawns are weak per se, it's that it's very, very difficult to counteract white's pawn majority, which is a healthy majority, by creating a passed pawn on the queen side. I really like Wesley's decision, though, to keep the rooks on the board and play for active counterplay. He wants to push a4, open up the a-file, and activate his rook on the second rank. Practically speaking, I think it's a better chance than trading rooks and suffering ad infinitum.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, I lost my focus there because there was a funny comment in chat. Oh, chat, you're distracting me again. But okay, a4 for black makes sense. A4 for black makes sense, and then we get an open a-file. But here we see rook g4, and the king has a big decision to make, right? Because if you back up, you're looking at tactics like this, and if you come toward the center, you're actually split from the pawn. And I don't know if there's an immediate way to take advantage of that, but white has weaknesses to poke at long term here.
Yeah,
and how do you do that?
It's hard to coordinate your piece tandem if you're white because a4 is looming large. You want to make sure that your pieces can defend the c2 pawn in the long run. So king e2 comes to mind, but king e2 maybe walks into a check on e8. He brings the knight back to e2,
he actually
tossing the bishop back.
C3
and the bishop
and f4 traps the bishop.
Oh, bishop
I think
e5,
this is
though?
the idea. So wait, which line?
Bishop e5 is what I would do here with West. Try to induce f4. And Danny, f4 would have been a terrible move because it would have sectioned off the rook, which now laterally moves to a4, pressuring the a5 pawn. Good move by Magnus.
Yeah, pressuring the a5 pawn, but also stopping black from getting any counterplay. And you never want your rook defending a little guy, and that rook is stuck defending that weakness. Though I think we should watch out for some ideas of this bishop getting out of the comfort zone or lost in the woods. It's not clear yet, but all right, g3 is played. Magnus just playing flexibly on both sides of the board, also preparing maybe an entryway for the king.
Yeah, what's infuriating for Wesley, he's got weaknesses on both sides of the board. A5, of course, but also h6, so the rook could trampoline from one side of the board to the other via the fourth rank, on demand. You could go rook h4, rook a4, so black is essentially at white's command. And speaking of rook h4, I think he's trying to garner the f4 square for his knight, but he's saving that check for a rainy day.
Yeah, I like that. Patience. Not just for a rainy day, but also for time pressure. You never want to play forcing moves when your opponent is clicking down on the clock because then they have a forcing response. playing poke and prod chess, I think, is one of the last skills people really develop in chess, Danya. Being very patient, because look what happens. People make mistakes when you leave them to their own devices rather than forcing moves, and I love this patient approach from Magnus.
And they make mistakes because they're sick and tired of defending passively, but the moment you try to make an active move, you know, the medicine is worse than the disease. Rook h5, chiseling at some of these weak squares in the center. Now, knight d3 is a huge threat because you won't be able to defend c5. I think Wesley's only chance is to push a4, essentially close your eyes, and try to create queenside counterplay at all costs. But with 30 seconds on his clock, I'm really worrying about Wesley's practical chances here. He might be losing this first one, but there's a4.
He plays a4. Magnus going to think about the right way to... Yeah, knight d3 was the other real threat here because that c5 pawn is going nowhere.
c4.
And if you play rook a5, there's b4?
I would play c4 and rook a2, and Wesley finds the only series of moves that guarantee practical drawing chances. 14 seconds, though, and he's got a long defensive road ahead of him.
What a nice idea. Create a weakness, go after the c2 pawn. Unfortunately, still tough.
Ugh.
Knight b4 is a fork on the a4 rook and the c6 square. Magnus pops in with check.
Can't go back. You get mated, have to go forward and give up d4 with check. No, rook takes d4. It's over. Just 2 extra
Defends
pawns.
the pawn. That was a sneaky problem there, that the knight was forking a rook and a square that led to threatening checkmate. And this is a very Magnus-esque game. Look at that game mark bar below, Danya. I call that the Magnus measurement tool stick. I just made that up. Because look
Magnus
at the game,
tool
Danya.
measurement
It's
stick.
even. No, but Danya, seriously, look at it. It's even, and then what happens for Magnus's side?
It's